Women on a Green Mission. Follow along as two friends document their unfurling permaculture journeys.
Join our chat each week where we'll be sharing how we and others apply permaculture to our gardens and daily life.
We're no experts. We're at the start of our journey, fumbling our way to a greener life. We'd love your company along the way.
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I feel like we start every intro like that. Hey,
Hey,
hey. I'm sorry, everyone who's listening, that you go, oh my God, eye roll. Get creative.
This is our last interview episode for the year.
Shit, that went quick.
I know.
Well, it went quick and not quick at the same time.
Well, this is a year of the podcast.
It is. It
is.
Whole year. Look at us go. Well done.
Yeah. So what's been happening in your world?
Oh, well, it's the crazy run into silly season. I think I'm not unique in the fact that, where things are hectic, and the more we're trying to slow things down and just take a breath and go, okay, what are the things that we have to do and what are the things that we can let go, the more that's actually coming into our lives. And we've got a lot on, but it's all really good value stuff. Like, it's those connections and catching up with friends and family and doing things that really light us up. It's not sort of just fluffy stuff that we can go, yeah, let's not do this and not do that.
Yeah.
But in saying that, we're really making sure that, in between all of that, we're plugging in a whole bunch of self-care. Like, last weekend, it was going to be quite warm and we were really tired. Like, we woke up Saturday morning, both just absolutely exhausted and uninspired, didn't want to go outside and do anything, work inside. It was just like, oh. And I said to Ant, let's just go to the beach. Like, we'll just potter around, do the bare things that we need to do for Saturday morning, and let's just, head over to Nelson Bay and we'll just go and spend the afternoon at the beach. So we did. We just had a few hours down at the beach and then went and got some, fish and chips and sat at the marina, and it was just really, really nice. Yeah. So that was good. And then Sunday came around. It was like, yep, up early. Great. Let's get stuck into it.
Yeah.
Still only got half a day in the garden because I was a little bit late and it was just hot and steamy, and like, it's one of those days that, like, what it's like, you walk outside and you're just sweating. And in amongst all that, we had our native bees were delivered.
Oh,
so thank you, Steve, from Australian Native Bee Co. I was so excited. So we had to delay it a week because the week before we were away in Queensland hanging out with friends. They had to delay the postage a week, but we got our bees and they settled in. I'd already sort of decided where I was going to locate them. Mounted them up on a star picket, and they're happy. And yesterday, the day before, I did the wicking towel over the top because it was really hot. Like,
I saw that on Instagram. Yeah.
And so I started with one bucket and then like the beach towel over the top, and then of course it's wicking, right? So it's going up and over and then just dripping onto the ground. So then I went, right, I'm going to get a second bucket and basically just created an arc so that it wicked from both sides. And the top was dry because it's sitting on top of the hive, but it was like you actually felt the sides of the hive, and it was really cool. Yeah. And the girls loved it. They were super active when I got home that afternoon. I was thinking, oh, please be okay. They were super happy. So, it worked a treat.
Wait, backtrack. They came in the mail?
They came in the mail.
How?
I know, right? So I was thinking the same. I'm like, I kept clarifying, going, like they're coming to my house, or do they go to the post office and I have to sign for them? Steve's like, no, they're coming to the house that you put the address down for. Like, that's where we deliver them. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, but okay. So they basically at night they will put when all the girls are inside, they put gauze and tape gauze over the front because they've only got one entry and exit point. So he just covers that up, and they're all self-sufficient in their little hive. And then when you get them, obviously you want to make sure that you've got everything set up so that you can locate them, because you can't like let them out in one spot and then move them 2 meters. Because they get confused, right? Like, that's
right. Yeah.
Part of the thing is, like, you can't just sort of move them a little bit and then like move them back because they get really confused. So I was really mindful of, okay, wherever I take the gauze off, is where they're going to be. Otherwise, I've got to like go move them like a significant distance to reset them to bring them back.
They don't get like bounced around in the mail? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I think they do probably get a little bounced around, but I mean, the hives are so compact, right, and contained, and they do such a good job of, you know, the way the comb is and everything. So, yeah, and I mean, obviously it's, you know, fragile and this way up only, and you know, But apparently, obviously it works a treat because they were happy little bees.
I've been doing all my potatoes in pots.
How's that going?
Yeah, fine. I mean, there's a couple of them that have like a bit of curly leaf, but I think that's due to the weather. Like they just got smashed with a whole heap of rain. They probably got a bit waterlogged. I actually want to do a side-by-side comparison with the pots, and I saw another method that instead of it being in a pot, because I think because we have such high rainfall here, they will keep getting waterlogged. It's kind of like a fine mesh cylinder.
Yep.
And you put them in that and they just poke out through the sides and grow up, and then you don't actually, I don't mound my pots anyway, I just chuck them in the ground. It was Hugh Richards did a YouTube on it, and so I just kind of copied his method, and he doesn't continually mound them, he just puts them in and then lets them go to their capacity kind of thing, and he always gets a good harvest. But yeah, growing them in the cylinders means you also don't have to mound because they kind of just pop up through the sides of the mesh. So yeah, I'm going to try that side by side and see maybe if it is a water problem and they're getting a bit waterlogged. Yeah. But yeah, they grow fine and it's easy because I can just tip them out in a tarp, sort through them all, and then use the soil again in like filling a new garden bed or just topping up somewhere and then adding some more, And then you don't get
random potatoes popping up where you don't want them necessarily. Yeah. But
I mean, random potatoes aren't bad.
No, not at all. I just went, you can stay there.
Yeah. Ease of harvest, I like the pots because I can literally just tip it out, and the kids like digging for them. And I feel when you fork into the ground to harvest potatoes, and like I don't want to damage them, at least if they're in a pot, you just tip them and you're not going to damage the skins, so that they're going to last a bit longer in the cupboard as well.
What's happening in your garden? So possums.
Yes, possums. So we have like chicken wire, and we've made it floppy so that we think the theory was that they won't want to climb it because it's floppy, and it's worked a treat. Like it's been great. When I planted my dahlias, they were getting into the dahlias and eating all the flowers, and I put the stuff up on there and they stopped coming in. So far it's worked really, really well. We had one bed that has got the floppy wire, and the corn got ripped out of that bed the other day. So I don't know whether they've learnt to climb it or whether because of the storms and everything it was a bit too floppy and it's fallen down and they've just kind of climbed over it. Yeah, I fixed that bed up and I made it a bit tighter, and they haven't gotten back into the corn, and the corn's growing now. I bought corn. I didn't end up getting more from seed after the rats and the kids and the hail, but they're going okay. Yep. And then I planted some sweet potato, and the sweet potato was growing and it was great. I just kind of stuck half a sweet potato upright in the ground, so it was half exposed, half in the ground. And that was fine for, a good week or so. And then I went out for a garden walk one morning, and the sweet potato had just been nibbled all at the top. And then 2 nights later, the whole potato had been taken out of the ground. So
that went for a family meal.
Out of the 6 I planted, there's only 2 left in there, which is fine because they'll just take over. But that's been netted now, so that's fine. And they came back and ate all the leaves as well before I netted it. So I was like, bloody hell.
Turds.
And then our volunteer pumpkin that's just popped up out of the ground, because it's a volunteer pumpkin, I didn't net that. And I thought, it'll be fine. Like, I didn't think anything of it. And then again, it's chomped this little, like a tiny little pumpkin, like my thumb size. He's chopped the whole pumpkin down. So last night I went for a little walk and there was 2 more pumpkins growing. So I put a pot over them this morning, a heavy pot, because I'm sick of all the vegetables getting eaten. And I feel like we haven't had a proper harvest now for a little while because everything just keeps getting eaten. So
that's all. It's all part of the learning curve, like in a new location, but it's still frustrating, isn't it? Like it's like I just want something to get going. Have you thought about like getting some cameras and setting up some cameras to sort of find out, like, is it a possum or or
Well,
if it's not, if it's something else, or how to, what they're actually doing so that you can
that's
kind of.
the other thing. I'm like, is it just a really big rat, or is it maybe even because Brett from Limestone in our private Limestone group put up an NPBC, needs, producers, behaviors and characteristics.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was very dire when you read the possum one. Like, it's, they rip through nets, they can climb wire, they're very sneaky, they're very agile. So maybe
They're
it's
incredibly smart.
yeah,
Yep.
maybe it's not a possum, because like maybe they would have been getting into all that a lot earlier. Like, I've seen possums, I'm doing night shift now, and I've seen 2 possums at night run across the road as I'm driving home. So I know there's possums around, but maybe it's a bandicoot, maybe it's a really big rat. Like, I don't know 100% it's a
Maybe it is
possum.
worth a camera. Like, you can pick them up for like quite cost-effective cameras, and then at least that way you know what you're dealing with, as opposed to putting all this time and effort and money into saying building something for a possum that then you find out that it's a rat, and it's like if you just sort of made a few tweaks, it would have been different or something.
Yeah. Like, I know in Tasmania, I listened to a podcast, they're based down there, and they just build like 10 by 10 walk-in cages, and they just do everything in there.
Nothing's
because
getting in.
well, yeah, like you've got bandicoots, you've got possums, like we also have rabbits here. They've got really bad rabbits down in Tassie in this person's yard, and they've got cattle, and so the cattle get into their yard. And so I was like, I don't know, like, is that what we need to do? So it's kind of like my last resort. But yeah, I don't know. And like, we've built all these espalier beds, and now I'm a bit worried that if it is a possum, they'll rip the netting. I don't know. They haven't got through the netting so far, so yeah, we'll see. Watch this space. Yeah, watch
That'll
this
be,
space.
Yeah, next season it'll be like the ongoing possum saga. Like, we might just have to do little catch ups just about the possums. It'll be interesting to see what you come up with, what you find, and what works and what doesn't. I think there'll be a lot of listeners that have been and are in the same situation as well, so they'll be listening along going, okay, so what works for you? I'm going to give that a crack as well.
Yeah.
And vice versa, if anyone's got any ideas on what Alysse can do to try and thwart the possums, then definitely jump onto the Facebook group and let us know.
Yeah, message me, reach out. I would love any tips.
So who have we got this week?
Yeah, so we have a lady called Koren on the podcast today. She's a journalist by training, and has gone into digital marketing as well. But she has a very strong affiliation with permaculture, and she's designing her life and her business around only working 4 days a week and really slowing down and being very intentional. She writes for The Guardian and the ABC as a journalist, but she does have her own business as well in digital marketing. And she targets small, ethical, aligned businesses that have like a triple bottom line. So she's very, aligning her life and her business and the choices she makes around permaculture. So yeah, she's super interesting, and I just love how she's designing her life in this very intentional and way that she can relax and recharge and have pockets of slow. So yeah, and she's in an urban environment, which is the other thing that was really cool to talk to her about, the fact that she made that decision to be in a city and how she integrates permaculture on a, urban block. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, hope you enjoy.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Practical Permaculture Podcast. This week we have Koren on our podcast. Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. I was just telling Koren that I first heard about her through Morag Gamble, and she's done work for a friend. So I feel like we're all connected in this little permaculture world, aren't we?
Yeah, it's beautiful how that happens. And often they're connections you don't even realize. It's like, oh, that mycelial network really is working.
Yeah, definitely. Before we get too far into the podcast, we always acknowledge the land that we're recording on. So we're about to use.
Well, I'm based here in Tandanya, Adelaide, so I'm on Kaurna land here.
And I'm up in Yagle country on the Northern Rivers. So for anybody who doesn't already know who you are, do you want to give us a little bit of a background and context as to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm based here in Tanzania, Adelaide, on a really small urban block. I'm just like a couple of kilometres from the city centre. Definitely not like a sprawling country acreage or anything like that. I've got 478 square metres, so smaller even than a lot of typical house blocks. Luckily, my house is quite small as well. It's only 87 square metres, so I do have a fair bit of room to garden. And I guess since I moved here in 2017 as a renter, but then I was lucky enough to be able to buy the place in 2021, I think it was. So since then, I suppose my dream for this location has been to turn it into an urban permaculture demonstration site. It's a very slow burn. I'm doing it by myself. I'm a solo mortgage owner and a solo business owner. So, there are lots of time, energy and financial constraints. But I've really been looking at what I can do outside in the garden.
Yeah.
In terms of permaculture design. This is a really old house. It's 100 years old. So I've been looking at small scale renovations that I can do within, indoors to kind of make my house more energy efficient. And then also just applying permaculture to every other context I can think of, like my business and my friendships and the way I travel, the food I eat.
Yeah.
I love that it's more than just gardening, I suppose.
Yeah. When did you first come across permaculture? Was it like something you grew up with, or was it a slow burn, or did it kind of slap you across the face one day?
Well, I think my parents always had strong environmental values. Like I grew up in the country in the Barossa Valley, like riding horses out until, dusk, and spent a lot of time outside as a kid. So I suppose that, that upbringing did inform me and my values. But it was really when I moved to Brisbane in 2008 and I was working for a metropolitan daily newspaper up there. I was a full-time journalist at the time and ended up covering politics, and it just felt like really out of alignment. It was a Murdoch paper. So at the time, my sister Alana and I decided that we would launch a blog. And we talked about sustainable ways to live in the city. And I think that started in 2010 or something and carried me all the way through the next decade, really. I moved to Spain. I lived in, like a 4th floor apartment in the middle of the city in Alicante. So I had no garden, and it was a really interesting experiment to figure out ways to live sustainably in such an urban environment.
Yeah.
So I guess that, the sort of ethos was always there, but it was when I moved back to South Australia in 2017 that I did my permaculture design certificate. And that really just clicked everything into place. So I was like, oh, this is so much easier. Now I have this established and practical, logical framework for sustainable ways of living, inspired by nature.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's supercharged in my life since then. There's the 3 ethics, the 12 principles, that design system that you can literally apply to anything. And all of that coincided with moving into this little house as well. So it's kind of given me like a canvas on which to like apply all of that new knowledge and give it all a crack.
And was it like a very conscious decision to live in a city, even though you had this permaculture lens? Like a lot of people, their first instinct is like to sell everything or to go find property or land, and that they need that to homestead or they need it to do permaculture. Like, so was that a conscious decision, or did it kind of happen and you made it work? Like, what was the context around that?
Well, I've actually always thought that I was a country person. I grew up in the country. Yeah. And then, I lived in Brisbane, I lived in Spain, I lived in Adelaide. And at some point, really recently, maybe 2 years ago, I realized like, actually, I've spent my entire adult life in cities. I probably need to just admit that I am a city person. And I remember when my partner at the time and I were looking for a house, and we were looking in the country, and we had lots of big discussions around what that would look like. And at the time I wanted, enough land for a few sheep and like a huge garden and all of that sort of thing. But I guess there was 2 major constraints there for me. One is money, obviously. That can be quite expensive to buy something large in a country area. But the other one I had to kind of face up to was like my own health and energetic capacity. Like I've got a few really strong feedback loops in my life. So I've got a back injury that gives me almost daily chronic pain and can influence my energy levels quite significantly.
Yeah. Okay.
And then also a brain type and neurotype that is quite prone to sensory overload and burnout. So I was like, okay, I probably need to make a better choice here about where I'm going to live because I don't have endless amounts of energy. And if I end up living in the country, that's going to be a real struggle, and I probably will constantly feel like a failure because I won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I arrived at with like, okay, I'm gonna try and do something in the city, and then you know how things kind of kick along and start to get a bit of momentum.
Yeah.
And I realized like this is actually a space where I could have a really big impact. Like there's statistics that say I think it's 9 in 10 Australians live in urban areas. Like that's phenomenal and makes sense if you think about like our geographical spread. But you know that means there's if I can find a way to help people understand more sustainable ways of living in the city, ways that permaculture can help you like practically apply that, I can actually help so many more people. And I think historically permaculture has been, you know, very focused around those large country acreages, which is totally awesome. And I'm in awe of all of those people who do manage to do that. But I think as we move into sort of this new financial reality for a lot of people, that's just not doable. So it's great to see now, you know, voices in the city popping up all over the country, kind of talking about ways to do it on a much smaller scale that's perhaps a bit more manageable if you're single or you've got a health condition or you're a mum of small kids or, you know, you've got any of those other constraints that mean you just don't have the time and energy for something huge. Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually just writing a story on that now for ABC. So it's very topical in my mind. I was literally writing about it yesterday. But yeah, I think that's been one of the things I've had to accept in doing this on my own is like, okay, I don't have great building skills. Like I just, you know, it's not something I've learned. And I started teaching myself. I do believe you can learn anything, but I found it really tedious and boring. And I was like, I actually don't enjoy this. And I don't need to have every skill under the sun. Like I could actually just fall in my community. And so when it came to, setting up some annual veggie beds in my back garden, you know, I'd done this permaculture design and I'd kind of figured out where everything needed to go, you know, to make the best use of the sun and the warmth and all of those sorts of things that permaculture design helps you with. And then I was like, great, I want to make these very low raised beds, super simple project for anyone with any kind of practical skills, but totally beyond me. And it turned out that I had a friend who's really great at woodworking, and he, you know, gently, probably over the course of a year, was like, I'd really like to help you with this. I can definitely help you with this. It took a bit of convincing. So yeah, I acknowledge that there is a hurdle there, you know, definitely for me and probably for lots of other people in asking for help. It's not something we necessarily do a lot of. But I did finally, and a crew of, I think there were 5 of us or something, came and built it all together. And it was amazing. Like the amount that 5 people can get done in just a couple of hours is astonishing. But it's super fun as well, you know. And then I've got this beautiful memory of this shared experience that we had in a space that's really important to me. So
well, that's lovely. Well, touching on your work for the ABC, I've read I've read a lot of your articles, and you are quite passionate about designing your work life to include rest and relaxation. And also, just to kind of design that life that you want to be living. Can you talk to that a little?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a lot of that rest-based mentality and systems thinking approaching to rest has come from necessity. Those 2 feedback loops that I was talking about earlier being, you know, my back injury, my energy levels, and my neurotype. So I guess in trying to figure out how I could be like a modern day person who works and makes money and is somewhat successful in life, but can also manage my own like personal capacity. That's what sort of starts all of this thinking, I guess, just to kind of give people a bit of background on my work. I have this fairly diverse work background, which is partly by design. Like in permaculture, we like to use and value diversity. That's one of the principles. But it's also how my brain works. I love to kind of be working on lots of different things at once. So I have founded my own digital marketing company, helping ethical small business owners communicate online. I also write largely about like permaculture living and city living for ABC and The Guardian. And then I do a bit of sustainable city living education as well. So like workshops and talks and things like that. So lots of different, what's the expression? Irons in the fire?
Yes.
And it's like, how do I balance that in a way where I'm not just constantly burnt out?
Yeah.
And I think like lack of proper rest is almost like a plague in our society at the moment. Like the more that I talk about this, the more I see people struggling with busyness or feeling guilty about resting or taking time to rest and then going, I don't even know what to do with this time. And I totally understand that. I've been there myself as well. And I guess I got to a point where I was like, okay, how can I use permaculture to create systems that automatically grant me rest? Because
we have so many of our listeners that go, oh, that's all well and great, but I'm in a city and how do I do this and how can I implement, these things? So I think it's great that there's people modeling that. So good on you.
And I think the thing there too is people often think that permaculture really is just about gardening. So they think, oh, I don't have a huge garden or I don't have even space for any gardening, so I can't do permaculture.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. It's a design framework that can be applied to any domain in your life. And as city dwellers, all of those other domains, like where we get our food from, how we travel to work, how we fly for holidays, the way we move around cities, they're often really, really unsustainable. So you can apply permaculture thinking and permaculture design to the way you live in a city. Totally doesn't even need to include a garden. And then have these really kind of profound impacts on your local community and the wider world. But I think there's a lot that permaculture could help us do in terms of figuring out ways to live more lightly in the city. And it doesn't even matter if you don't have a garden.
Totally. And I think it also brings into that concept of community sufficiency. People buy these properties and think, oh, I'm going to be totally self-sufficient and provide it all myself. And it's just not realistic. Like you have to buy your coffee from somewhere or, you will always have that, I feel. But also, what if you break your leg? What if you hurt your back? Like, if you are on a property, you still need community around you. And so I think when you bring it back to that urban context, it really makes you find your community and create more community sufficiency. And I think that's a good thing. I think it creates resiliency in our economy and community and our life. So
yeah, I definitely agree. And you have to work hard to build hyper-local community in a city these days. Like if you just even think about the way new houses or new units are built, they're built with these frontages that are designed to decrease interaction. Like you drive into a garage, you roll the door down and you enter your house through like some hidden door or, you rarely see, there's not that opportunity for like waving at your neighbour in the driveway or anything like that. It's quite closed. Like I've got this older style house, so I've got, a little balcony thingo out the front that you can sit on and sort of wave at people and that sort of thing. But it is harder now to make those hyper local connections. So I think permaculture kind of, because it so stridently encourages that, it's a way of like relocalizing our cities as well. And there's all sorts of little ways that you can do that. Like the dog park, I always think is like I personally don't love dogs, which is a controversial opinion, but I'm accept that there are many people who do. And if you're one of them, that seems like a really great place to meet local people. I've put a little honesty stall out the front of my house, which is just a place where I share bits and pieces from my garden. But it's become this amazing community interaction point. Like people just see it there and assume that I'm going to be up for a chat, and I am. So that's lucky. But, it's like I know heaps more neighbours now just from having these incidental chats in front of that stall. So, I love that it's kind of these strategies provide a way to get to know, like, literally the people living on either side of you or the people in your neighborhood, because like you say, that's resilience. They're the people who are going to be right there if something goes wrong, not your friend who's on the other side of the city.
Yeah. And I saw on your Instagram, you even had a little perma blitz when you were building some of your garden beds and things. That's so cool.
Realized I'm not very good at just spontaneously taking time off or something like that. So, and there is this permaculture principle around apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So that was the main principle that I worked with when kind of designing this system. It was like, okay, the feedback is that my body can't go as hard and fast as I'm asking it to. And the self-regulation that I need to apply is something that works within this, like, can't do it spontaneously. There needs to be a regular system for me for rest.
Yes.
So what that at the moment looks like is I take every Friday off. So I work a 4-day work week. And then I take quarterly rest weeks. So every season or every 3 months, I take just 1 week off.
Yeah.
And they're booked in my calendar. They're like non-negotiables. But crucially, I don't book anything into those times, even in the rest weeks. Occasionally I've gone on a holiday, but mostly I'll just stay home.
Yeah.
And the idea of that is just creating space to show up on that day and do whatever I need on that day. And some days, rest might look like a big day of gardening and really getting out there and having a great time in the garden after a full week, of screen time as a digital marketer. But other weeks it might look like reading a book for 12 hours because I'm actually totally down and out, or watching TV even for 12 hours. That happens at times when I get really burnt out. So yeah, those systems, like, they've been really important to me for self-regulation. And I, obviously that's not going to work for everyone, but I guess the core idea there is, like, for people to think about their own feedback loops, like what's going on in their life that's telling them something isn't working here around busyness or stress or lack of rest. And then looking at how self-regulation could help you rest more. Like, is it something every morning, or are you a really spontaneous person? Do you just need to have a little bit more room in your calendar for spontaneous rest? Or I don't know, it could look, could look like anything, but the idea there is observation, like close observation, and then figuring out something that works for you.
I so resonate with what you were saying about rest, because a bit of our context that the listeners probably know but you don't is that I got really burnt out, and so we sold everything and we travelled around Australia for 2 years with our kids in a caravan, and then we've chosen where we're living now because of affordability. So we didn't want to have a big mortgage. We didn't want to be a slave to our finances, and I feel like we're having to always pick up more hours and, chase the dollar to then fund our lifestyle. And so we've kind of made that very intentional decision to slow down. My husband only works 4 days a week. I only work part-time. But I guess also with that decision, do you think you have to shift your perspective then on, like, what you need or want, or how you define wealth or happiness, and that kind of shift of perspective? Because potentially it might mean losing out on a bit of income or making sacrifices in other areas of your life.
Yeah, definitely. And you've probably seen this in your own life too. I think there's a couple of things there. So one thing that I've noticed I have to be really conscious of is reminding myself of my own values and what is enough for me. So every now and then, I might go visit a friend who's got a really fancy house, or like see someone roll up in a really fancy car or something like that. And start to think, oh, I should sell my totally shitbox car and buy a better one. Or, I mean, obviously an electric one would be a lot better, but that thought is more around, like, wanting to look better than anything values based. So I suppose there's a lot of work in it's almost like tunnel vision, like reminding yourself, like, no, I'm consciously going in this direction because I've acknowledged the feedback, I've accepted it, I've regulated for what's right for me. So all this other stuff that all these other people are doing, that's great, that's their choice, but I don't have to compare myself to that or, try to adhere to that. So that's helped a lot. I think one of the hardest ones for me personally is seeing other gardeners and seeing how quickly they like smash through stuff then I remind myself of all the things that this slow journey offers me, like that connection with those friends who really wanted to help me, or, learning new skills. Some of them I don't find boring, so I actually do want to learn them, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of being aware of what's right for you, I think, is really important. But even just budgeting, like before I made a lot of those decisions around the amount of time that I would be able to take off, I just did a really solid budget. And it's just the basic stuff that you'd normally do, like figure out everything you spend money on and then break it down so you know each week and month how much you need to earn. So that gave me a realistic picture of what I need to achieve in order to make this lifestyle real. So it wasn't like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this and hopefully it will be fine. And I think that's another great thing about permaculture, is that it is so often grounded in the practical and the reality of a situation. There's less like, just give it a go and see if it works, and more like think it through, make a plan, look at it from all the different angles. In a garden, you might map sectors of like sun and wind and frost pockets. In your financial world of permaculture, you might map, mapping your budget is kind of one sector. You might map all your different potential income sources and other ways to make money or spend less money. I think that's a really important one to kind of map. And so doing that, how can I make living cost me less? Exercise led to some really lovely things like, okay, I can share internet with my neighbours. Like I live in a house that has a shared wall. Is it a duplex? Is that what they call it?
I can't remember the word for it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so they're literally just on the other side of the wall. So we can share internet really easily.
That's cool.
And that reduces like both of our costs. Or, growing some of my own food, or bartering, like finding like-minded businesses who offer services that I need, like acupuncture or massage for my back, or beautifully organically grown veggies from a local farm. Like some of these things I can barter my services for to help just the business of life cost less.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of always been a bit of a work in progress, I suppose, and it sort of always will be. But they're the main things that help keep me on track.
Yeah. How do you find that process of bartering, especially in a city where money is the main commodity?
It's worked really well for me. I think that the uncomfortable part for me in the beginning was figuring out what is a fair barter and how do you effectively communicate the value exchange so everyone's really clear. And I had a few instances where that wasn't super clear, and then it was like, oh, hang on, what are we offering? And so I'm much better at that now, just upfront, like, hey, would you like this? In exchange, I can give you that. Or I'm looking for someone to help me with this, and in exchange, I can give that. Or and then you can have the conversation, but at least straight up. Like a good example is I recently had my 40th birthday party here.
Happy birthday.
Cute. And I really wanted a photographer to come and mark the occasion. It was felt like a big milestone for me, and everyone dressed up in crazy vintage outfits. So I really wanted to capture it. And there's an amazing photographer here in Adelaide, Bree Hammond, and I'd loved her work for years. And I knew that she was fairly like-minded, so I just sent her an email and said, like, not sure if you're open to this at all, but I'd love you to come and shoot my party, and in exchange I can offer you some coaching, some digital marketing coaching, and this is the kind of offering. And it was a heck yes from her.
Wow,
so
that's cool.
That was a really cool one, because we'd been lightly in touch. We'd messaged each other a little bit on Instagram, but I think all of the other ones I've had direct connections with, and that's one of the first ones that I've felt confident in, going out and just pitching it cold, I guess. So yeah, I think if people are looking at delving into the world of bartering, maybe start with someone you know first. It definitely feels easier. You can iron it out, figure out how you want to communicate about it. But you can sort of see if people are like-minded too. So you can find, service providers that seem like they've got similar values. And if people say no, that's cool. Like, if you don't ask, you don't know.
There's a good book. I don't know if it's Grown and Gathered or The Village, but Matt and Lentil, they exchange flowers for a whole year and for
Wow.
everything that they needed. Have you read it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I've got that on my
Oh, yeah, there
shelf
you go.
behind me here.
Yeah, and that really opened my eyes up. And they just said even some of the butters that you might not seem like fair in a financial sense, they learnt so much
Yeah.
from it. So I
Yeah.
found that really interesting.
That's so cool.
Uh,
I know some people do barters as a straight time for time, like
Oh, okay, yeah.
as opposed to my service costs this much and yours costs this
Yeah.
much. It's like an hour of your time for an hour of my time. So that can be a nice way to propose it, or
Yeah.
or you just agree on whatever people think is fair and kind of go from there. Yeah.
And so with your work being a journalist and in digital marketing, I mean, they're often seen as very fast-paced, bang, bang jobs where you're in that world of busyness. Did you find that making that conscious decision to only work 4 days impacted, or is that something that you thought about? Did it ever cross your mind, or did you kind of just have faith that you'd find those connections that would work for you and that it would all kind of be okay?
A little bit of all of those things. So I think clear communication can solve almost any problem.
Yeah.
So being really clear with people, from the proposal documents where I talk about like, other than our first call, I don't take phone calls that are unscheduled. It needs to be via email for me because I like to work in really focused chunks, and I like to preserve that time. So then I'm not getting random calls on my Fridays off because my clients don't really call me unless it's a scheduled call. I guess I'm lucky in that I talk about this kind of thing fairly frequently publicly, through like the ABC stories, but also on my Instagram and my newsletter. So I often find clients, like for example, I'll send an email to current clients a couple of weeks before my quarterly rest week and say like, hey, just heads up, it's coming up. Is there anything beyond our already scheduled work that you urgently need done? Otherwise, I'll, keep chuffing along. And the most common response I get to that is like, this is the coolest thing ever. I need to implement something like this in my business.
I love it. I just love it. And I really admire you for having those hard boundaries, because it's so easy to say yes and to get wobbly. And I think you also did a recent post about the fact that you did kind of break that rule and like what you did to mitigate that and how you planned for it. And I love that because there are times that you may not have a choice, or you kind of do have to hustle, but putting boundaries on even that, and so you don't get stuck in that hustle mentality infinitely, and it just kind of becomes second nature without even consciously thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah. My friend Nat Mendham talks a lot about radical rest, and I like her approach to it, where she talks about, mimicking nature, and in nature there are always these cycles of like explosive growth and then rest. Like if you think about plants in winter being quite dormant versus, in spring, this, going nuts. So yeah, recently I did have this kind of perfect storm of like personal and work events that I couldn't shift or move or spread. And it was a 7-week stint, which was far too long for my little brain. But there were lots of other things, requests that came in during that time. And it was quite easy to just be like, not right now, yes, but it needs to be in December or January or February. So I guess what I was thinking of there is like, okay, if this is my spring sprint, which funnily enough it was in spring, then I'm going to need a winter, at least a short winter after this to recover. So I've kind of kept my December fairly free so that I have some recovery time. So yeah, there's just so many different ways that you can incorporate it all. But I think the main thing is, letting people know, being really clear about what you're doing so that they're not, most people don't, most of my clients know that I'm not around on a Friday. So even if they email me on a Friday, they don't expect a reply.
Yeah.
And I've just been clear about that. But I think the other thing around the business world is there's all sorts of different brains out there that work in all sorts of different ways.
True. Yeah.
And we've been fed this line that you have to work in a certain way, in this certain corporate, professional, always available, fast-paced way to be successful in business. And sure, that does work, but there are lots of other brains out there for whom that doesn't work, or they don't expect that, or they wouldn't
Yes.
want that. So I love that we're sort of getting to a place now, because so many people are having their own small businesses, where we're starting to get this diversity of approaches. And there's plenty of people who would think my way is super annoying. They're like, no, I just want to pick up the phone and be able to call you.
Yeah.
And that's cool. They can go and work with someone who works like that. But there's also lots of other people who are like, oh, I appreciate the, the more slower pace of this, the considered a sort of communication and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think if you have your own business, you're in a bit of a lucky spot where you can, to some degree, start to make decisions that work a little bit better for you and your own brain and energy. And then, have a bit of an impact on the diversity of the business world at large.
Yeah. And it's also those people who hustle constantly. It's at what cost as well? What other areas of your life may be suffering or not rich because of the choice that you've made.
Absolutely.
I know me personally, like we can't really structure our week so much like that, because with young kids, things change all the time. But we try and structure our days like that. So our mornings are our kind of busy hustle times. Like we have a coffee, hubby and I, in the morning, and the kids know that they don't come near us. That's our coffee time. And then after that, he goes to work, I do some work, and by that time they're outside kind of playing. And then at lunch we kind of have a reset, and the afternoon it's like all bets are off. We have no commitments, we don't do anything.
Wow.
And so we've structured each day like that, so we know that the mornings are busy time where I'm switched on in the morning. I totally check out of an afternoon. I'm terrible. We had someone in the UK try and FaceTime me, and it was like 6 p.m. here, and I'm like interviewing them, like not even, I don't think I was even in the room. I was awful. I shouldn't have said yes to it. But that's that, apply self-regulation and feedback. But we structure our days so that our mornings are our most productive, and then the afternoons are write-off, and we just kind of slowly cook dinner and potter around the garden or do whatever we need to do. And same with homeschooling. Like we don't have school holidays. We just do 2 or 3 days all year round, because that's what suits us. So I think it's really important to consciously design your life and how you live and you work and how you go about the world. And I think it makes such a big difference energetically to how you live too, when you do start practicing that and follow through with those decisions.
Oh, I totally agree. I love that you found that cycle within a day. That's so beautiful. And it just makes me think like permaculture design is kind of like a choose your own adventure for like sustainable living. It's like you get this really solid framework and these ethics and principles to work within. And then you get to like look at your own life and your own context and figure out how they'll work specifically for you. And there's no one right way, but the overall impact is that we're all living like with a bit more like energy and rest and happiness, and hopefully a little bit more sustainably, a little bit more lightly on the planet. And it's just lovely that it provides this framework that helps you to make those choices.
Your garden is amazing, by the way. All the photos that I see on there. Have you got any tips for people who are in urban areas or small spaces, how to garden in that way so that you still have this abundant, resilient, thriving polyculture of a garden in a smaller space?
I think one of the biggest constraints that small spaces give is sunlight. Like you might have a large building next to you that blocks a lot of sunlight, or a neighbour's tree, or your own house, and that sort of thing. So one of the concepts that permaculture teaches is sun mapping, where you look at where the sun falls. Obviously, the sun is higher in the sky in summer and lower in winter. So those shade lines move throughout the year. And when you're first starting gardening, like you might not even be aware of that. And I think it's like, what is it? Leafy greens need minimum 6 hours of sunlight a day, but lots of other plants need more, like tomatoes and cucumbers and all those really delicious things need more sunlight. So if you've got a spot in your garden that only gets 4 hours of sunlight a day, it's going to be tricky, and it might not even be worth growing tomatoes there, for example. You might just try leafy greens. So I think the first thing I'd recommend to people is have a look at sun mapping. It's really easy to do. It doesn't cost anything. I think I've even got a blog on it that runs you through how to
Cool.
how to do it step by step.
Yeah.
And I've got examples of my own garden plus a friend of mine, Nicole, in the Sunshine Coast. I think she has like 50 square meters or something like that, really tiny context. And we sun mat on her little block as well. She's got a lot of shading and figured out, placement of things. And that can be the difference between success and failure, just having enough sunlight. So yeah, if you're going to do anything, I would say figure out the sun first.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that works really well in small urban contexts is growing vertically.
Yeah.
You can maximize your space by going up. And what I've done here, in Tundania, Adelaide, it's hot a lot of the time. It gets above 40 degrees frequently in summer. Really low rainfall, like less than 500 mils a year. So keeping soil covered and moist is crucial in this particular context. So I've planted a food forest in my backyard, which is sort of like fruit trees and then understories of other edible, like strawberries and asparagus and rhubarb and I don't know, lemon balm and all these beautiful perennials. And I'm finding that's working really well, both in terms of the amount of food I'm able to grow in this really quite small space. Yeah. But also it's just a lot less work planting plant things that live for more than 2 years. You're not there constantly, having to pull everything out and put things back in. So I do have an annual bed area, but it's quite small and a lot of my garden is dedicated to perennials. So yeah, that would kind of be something to look at. You can definitely make a little food forest in an urban space. They work, even in a pot, they work really well. Yeah. But even failing that, think about, mesh that you could grow up or, what are they called? The garden arches. That you can grow up and over. And they're all just ways to get more space in something that's quite small.
And do you find growing up also helps with the sun then too? Like it might be a shadier spot down low, but kind of once it kind of gets high enough that those little solar panels are getting more light as they get higher?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my garden, I've got a northern fence line that throws quite a lot of shade. It's got a neighbour's shed behind it that's quite high. So in winter, it's in deep shade. And as part of my permaculture design, I designed my chicken run to kind of come off that fence. So we're sort of like a bit further back. So the chickens can kind of be in that shady area where it would be really hard to grow. And then the food forest sits in front of that fence. So those are trees that are going to get a bit higher. So whilst their, roots might be permanently in shade, they're exactly like you say, their leaves, their solar panels are much higher. So they're going to be able to hit the sun and make use of that space.
Yeah, and it's that permaculture principle of integrating as well, I guess, so if you have that small space, how you integrate your chickens with the rest of your food forest and all those things, because
that's right.
I think that traditional way of maybe gardening where everything is separate makes it really tricky in a small space. So I think you've given us a lot to think about. And this time of year, people often start reviewing the year that was and looking forward into 2025 and maybe what they might want to implement. If someone's really resonating with this idea of maybe curating their life a little bit more and how they're working and putting intentional rest in, where do you think they should first start? Like, would it be with an audit maybe of their time, or kind of how could you go about that if you kind of want to implement these things?
I think it would be worth figuring out what your feedback loops are. So that could be things like writing a list of things that make you feel energized versus, take energy. I guess one of the things that became clear to me when I did all of this thinking was that I didn't actually know what rest was for me.
That's interesting.
So when it came to thinking about needing more rest, I was like, but what do I do? Like, what does that even look like? And so then I spent maybe 6 months, like really consciously clocking, this tires me out. This is really regenerative. And that's how I realized that, really going hard in the garden actually can be a form of rest for me. So that could be a really nice place for people to start. And it might be, like weaving or mending or going for a walk or hugging your chickens or, there's all sorts of different things that can look like. But I think it's really impossible to rest if you don't know how. So that could be a good place to start. And then, looking also at what are the things that do drain your energy, and they might be things that you just have to do in life. There are things like that we all have to do. But once you're sort of a bit more aware of those like pluses and minuses, you can start to figure out ways to balance them. I think we've given such great examples here. Like you've got this in sort of a daily cycle. Mine's more of a quarterly and weekly cycle. Like you can see it can work in any context across any time span. It's just a matter of observing, which funnily enough, that's sort of step one in permaculture design, isn't it? Observe.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, lovely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. I was so keen to talk to you. We've had this in the calendar for a whole month and I was super, super excited.
Me too.
So I'm glad we got the opportunity. And I'd love to find that Suncap blog and put it in the show notes because I think that would be super helpful. We have so many urban listeners. But I'll put all the links to your website and what you do down below so people can reach out. And what's your Instagram if people wanted to go and find you there as well?
It's just my name. So Koren, Koren Helbig, Helbig. Really, really challenging name, but
that's all right.
Get the link.
My name's Alysse, but it's spelled Alysse, and my maiden name is Croatian and nobody can pronounce or spell it. So I feel you. I feel
the struggle
spelling.
is real. Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. And just so fascinating to hear more about your life as well. I look forward to listening to more of your awesome podcasts.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can talk again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Bye.